Computer, request all biographical information.
I want to talk about a film I saw a couple weeks ago. Now, I saw this film the same weekend I saw Terrifier 3. That was the subject of my video last week. By the time this video comes out, this movie, Saturday Night, will almost definitely be available on streaming service. Now, Saturday Night is a biopic about the first ever episode of Saturday Night Live. Now, I probably haven't watched this show in about 25 years, but for people my age, this show was a must-watch late-night Saturday television program, especially in the late 70s all the way up through the late 90s. The list of comedians whose careers were spawned because of this show are too numerous to name. Now, just a few of these are Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, and Tina Fey. But if you look it up, you will find dozens more. Now, biopics are often big hits with moviegoers. Many of the highest grossing non-franchise movies are biopics. And this subgenre makes up a large fraction of acting Oscars given out every year, as audiences appreciate an actor's ability to imitate a real-life figure. Think of last year's Oppenheimer. It was a massive box office success, and it raked in the awards, especially the Oscars. Not all biopics, however, are beloved by viewers. Some are poorly made. They're poor imitations of famous people, or they take too many liberties with the truth. Think of the 2013 movie Jobs, the movie about Apple founder Steve Jobs. This was an all-around flop and deserved to be. It's pretty brutal. And while I do find Ashton Kutcher funny in things, he was poorly cast as Steve Jobs. So what do we have here? Is this a big hit, beloved by fans and critics, that goes on to have lots of success as a biopic? Or is it an example of yet another failure in this subgenre because it was poorly made and poorly received? Well, before we answer that, let's talk a little bit about the plot for the movie Saturday Night.
Let's talk.
It's 10 p.m., October 11th, 1975, and Lorne Michaels arrives at the NBC building to prepare for the airing of the first episode of NBC's new show, Saturday Night. Now, the evening is fraught with accidents and a dysfunctional cast and crew. Michael's boss, Dick Ebersol, warns him that executives from across the country have come in to see the show. Now, despite encouraging words to Michaels, Ebersol makes it known that the network has no faith in the show and is ready to replace it with a taping of a rerun of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Now, as the clock ticks down and tensions mount, Michaels must struggle with his own insecurities, a cast of characters who seem not able to focus on the job, and a network planning for his failure. So what works in this film? Well, let's talk about the cast. Whoever was the casting director of this movie did a phenomenal job of finding people who look a lot like the original SNL cast members. Look up some of these people in this film and compare them to who they're playing, especially the actor who played John Belushi and the actress who played Jane Curtin and also Gilda Radner. It's kind of uncanny. Speaking of actors, I feel like they did a great job portraying the actual people they play, particularly Corey Michael Smith as Chevy Chase, Ella Hunt as Gilda Radner, and Matt Wood as John Belushi. Veteran actors William Dafoe and J.K. Simmons really shine in their roles as well, doing an outstanding job in their supporting roles. Dafoe plays NBC chief David Tebbutt, and Simmons plays comic legend Milton Berle. I do also love the gritty nature of this movie. It's a period piece taking place in the mid-70s, and everything looks, sounds, and feels like the mid-70s. You could almost feel like this movie was filmed back then. Finally, director Jason Reitman does an outstanding job of capturing what must have been a really incredibly tense and chaotic run-up to this first episode. It's something we take for granted, but there wasn't anything like this before. We see a lot of sketch comedy shows now. Some of them are live. But prior to SNL, there was nothing like this, so it must have been really tense.
That's funny. That's funny.
What doesn't work here is that while Reitman does a great job of portraying the chaotic nature of this environment, The fact that it is so chaotic makes it a little difficult to follow on the screen at times. Also, you're dealing with a very large ensemble cast in this movie, and if you don't know who these people are, like if you came into this film not knowing anything or very little about SNL, it's going to be hard for you to get a sense of who these actors are portraying. Now, you can still enjoy it, but this is definitely a movie that was made for people who already know something about the early years of Saturday Night Live. Finally, this movie isn't about the cast of SNL, actually. It's mostly about Lorne Michaels and how he got this show off the ground, which is fine. It's an interesting story, but man, the people who played in that first cast, every single one of them deserved their own film. And therein lies the biggest problem with Saturday Night, the movie. It centers on the man who was probably the least interesting person in that studio that night. But despite my criticism, I really enjoyed this movie. Now, I'm a big fan of early SNL. I grew up watching the show. I know its history. So I was able to follow it a little bit better than someone who may not be in that same boat. So excellent performances, a tight script, and an expertly paced narrative make Saturday Night a brilliant encapsulation of the chaos, innovation, and raw talent of that first season. It's stressful, it's chaotic, but above all, it's very entertaining. Saturday Night is a loving tribute to a show which most Americans have at least a passing knowledge of, even if it sometimes feels like it was made just for the show's most ardent viewers. Now, sadly, as of this writing, this movie looks like it's going to be a bit of a flop, but that shouldn't stop you from checking it out when it hits a streaming service. I think you're really going to like it, especially if you're in your late 40s to early 50s and grew up with the show. And honestly, this was probably one of the better films I've seen this year.
You're really gonna like it.
Well, that's it from me this week. Tune in next week where I talk about whatever I've seen. In the meantime, click that like button, subscribe, leave a comment or a question. Share this video with friends and enemies alike. And as always, thank you for giving me your valuable time, and I'll see you next week. Take care.